Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session of the Data Doctor. Today, we're going to talk about reference lines and reference bars and distributions. It's a way of adding an additional dimension into your Viz and provide additional information for your user. First, let's talk about where they're located and how you use them. They're located on the Analytics tab, and I like to use a drag and drop method and just drag them right onto the canvas and select what line I want to use directly from the canvas. Once it's there, you can also edit that line to do a lot of different things. Now, we're going to take a look at a lot of different examples, so let's get into the detail. Like always, I'm going to use the Superstore data. It's the same data set that you have in your copy of Tableau, so you can reproduce anything that we've got here. And I'm just going to start with a very simple trend line where we're looking at sales by quarter. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to add onto that line the overall average so that we can see when sales are above average and when sales are below average. I can go to the Analytics tab right here, and I've got options here on the different line types. There's a constant line and average, which we're going to use. We're going to take a look at many of these. And I've also got some custom types. Now, what we're going to find is that the controls for these default values and the controls for the custom are really the same controls. And I'm going to show you how to use them, and you'll know how to use each of them. But we're going to start with a simple average. I'm going to take the average line, I'm going to drag it, I'm going to put it on the chart. And all of a sudden you see a line appear. And this is the overall average of the data that we see there. And it's pretty easy to tell what's above average and what's below average. Now, the line itself just says average. I would like to change that. I'd like to see the actual value, and I'd like to see some other things that are different about the line. So I'm going to open it up. I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to edit the line. Okay. And you can see, first of all, this same user interface, the same box opened up for all of these lines and for the custom lines also. So it's the same interface. And once you learn how to use it, you'll be able to make your own custom lines and bars very easily. First, we're working with a line. It is based on the sum of sales. Okay. And we're going to use the average. That line is the average. If you didn't want to see the average, you can open that. We could look at the maximum value, or we could look at the minimum value, or the median. But today we're going to look at the average, or at least to start with, we're looking at the average. And you can see this label here that says average is set right here. It says, okay, the computation is what's being shown. I want to see the value. I don't want to see the computation. I could also select none if I didn't want to see anything, but I'm going to put in the value. You can see you can set up the tooltip, either a custom tooltip or no tooltip at all. And we're looking at the line only. So the value of the average is 145,000 that you see there. The line has been formatted, and I custom formatted the line before we started here. And I formatted it as a dotted line and red in color. But you may not want to see that. You can color it any way you want. You could have no line, for example, or we could have a solid line, and we can choose the color. And I'm just going to set it as blue. And now when we look at the chart, it's pretty easy to tell what values are above the average and what values are below the average. Well, if we can put a average, or if we can put a reference line on one of the axes, can we put it on both of the axes? Well, sure. I've created a chart here, and this chart is a simple scatter plot. I'm looking at the 17 subcategories, and I've plotted them profit and sales. And I wanted to look here on the profit axis and find the average profit. And I created a reference line to do that. And once again, the wizard opens up here. We're looking at a line. It's the sum of profit, the average. And I'm using a custom label here. I went down to custom. And all I've done is I've added, I keyed in average profit equals, and then I chose to put in the value, and that's how the value got in there. And it's just a simple line, and I chose gray to put on the chart. So that's where this line came from. Then I came over on the sales axis and added another average, and I'm going to edit that also. Same way, sales average, and I average sales, and it once again is a gray line. And once we've added those two, they are on the chart, and it's very easy to separate out what's above average, both for sales and profit, and what's below average for sales and profit. And of course, these are dynamic in the sense if we added filters, they'd be filtered, the lines would change accordingly. Okay. You may have noticed on some of these charts, there's an option to add a confidence interval. And let's see how we did that. I did it here, and this is the same chart we looked at before, the average line. I've just included a confidence interval here. And we've got the sum of sales, the average that we've been looking at. I want to put the values on again. And I open up this box, and you have a choice of doing the line only, which we looked at before, and the line plus a confidence interval, or just the confidence interval. And I've got line plus confidence interval. And then you can choose the level that you want. This is a 95% confidence interval. If you wanted a 90, you could change it to 90, or if you wanted something like a 99% confidence interval, you could do that also. But that's the way you would add a confidence interval to your line chart. Well, that's pretty easily done. We've been able to add a whole lot of information to the chart, not by actually writing calculations, but simply by adding a reference line. Well, there's some other things that you can do with reference lines. I've got a chart here that I started, and this is just sales by month. And I'm looking at a specific year, and I've got 3 charts. I've got the chart for 2021, 22, and 23, and then I'm going to bring them together on a line chart. And you can see that in 2021, the maximum sales was this value up here, and it's a little over 75,000. And we got to 2023, and it's much higher than that. And if we put them all on the same dashboard, it leaves the wrong impression. It leaves the impression, if I just look at this, that each year the sales were about the same, unless I spend time and look at the axes. Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like this axis common across all charts. Well, we can do that by adding a reference line. And I'm going to show you here. I've already done it. But here, we'll take a look at each one of these charts. And I've created a couple of calculations to do this. The first calculation I've done is a very simple calculation. All this does is it takes a look at by month, and it sums the sales. And I also created a calculation for the overall max of the monthly sales. I want the maximum of the monthly sales because that I'm going to use to set the upper limit on the chart that we see. Now I have to put that into the marks card. I've done it right here. That's the overall sales. And once I've done that, I can use it I can use it as a reference line. Now I've hidden the reference line. You can see when I hover over it, you can see the line up here. But I'm going to edit it so I can show you what we did. I'm just adding the line. The line is the sum of the overall fixed month, and I set it to maximum. Okay. I don't want any label. I don't want a tooltip. I don't want to see the line. You don't want your user seeing the line. The line itself, I've colored the same as the background. There's no fill in the line at all. So the line's there, but you just don't see it. You just don't see it. And then I did the same thing, and I put it on this 2022 chart. And if I went up there, you'd see it again. And the 2023 chart. So that when we look across all of them on a dashboard, now these lines have the same axis, the same range on the axis, the y-axis, and they are related to one another. And if I wanted to come in, I could hide the axis. I just show header. I take off the header there and take off the header here. And you can see that the chart itself now looks like three separate charts. It's dynamic in the sense that when these values change, we're working with LODs for fixed maximum values. The upper limit will change also, but now all these charts are in sync with one another. That's kind of a cool thing that you can do with reference lines. Let's take a look at a couple of other things. We've been working primarily with measures. I'd like to look at what you can do with a date. And then, if we can put in a reference line with measures and values on measures, can we also put one in on dates? And sure enough, we can. I've got a continuous date, and you want a continuous date here. And I've added a reference line on the date itself, and I'll edit it again. You see here, I've got the reference line, and I'm relating that reference line to a parameter that I created. This is an order date parameter, and you can see it up here. Okay, I just created that order date parameter. Okay, and for the label, I want the value. I want the date of that parameter. Okay, and I've just got a simple line there. And that's all I've done here. And now that line is related to this date. And if we wanted to come in here and we wanted to change this date, for example, to if we wanted to change that date, we could change this date to any date that we wanted, and the line's going to adjust accordingly. Okay. And very simply, it'll adjust based on what the user selects. Well, that's kind of cool. But if I can do that, I can also relate that order date parameter using a parameter action. Now I've come in here on this worksheet and I've added an action. Okay, and it's a parameter action. And I've set it to hover. So when I hover at any point on the line, that reference line is going to change. The actual value of the parameter is going to change, and that's going to change the position of the reference line. And all we're doing is we're changing the order date parameter, and we're changing it based on the month of the order date. Okay. And we've got that set now, so I can click on any line, any point on that line, and that reference line is going to change. Well, if we can do that, we can take a look across different metrics with the same reference line. We can come to a point, I want to see the maximum sales. Well, there's the profit when the sales were maximum. And you can see the line responds accordingly. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with reference lines. We can use them to set the range on a chart. We can use them dynamically to find different dates, as we just did here, or we can use them as they were initially intended to do things like find maximum, minimum, and averages, and it just provides another layer of information to your end user. Well, I want to take a look at reference bands now. A band is essentially a line that's thick, and it's got a value at the top and a value at the bottom, and we're going to take a look at some reference bands and see how we can go ahead and use those. And I've done that. I've started it right here, and this is the same chart we've been looking at. We've got the order, the sales as quarters of order days, and I've created a reference band, and this is how the default would look. Now we're in this option here. We're looking at bands, and when we look at bands, we now have two sets of values to look at. We have a band from and a band to. So we'll start here. We've started the top or the bottom of the band. The minimum is based on the sum of sales. We're once again taking the minimum value, and this is what the default will come up. It comes up computation again, and I like to see the values. So, and they work independently. You've noticed I've changed the value, and it only affects this group, which is the minimum value. And then I've got a separate set of controls for the maximum value. And we can come in and that's sum of sales, and it's a maximum value. And I'm going to change to look at the value on that. So now we can look at the min and the max on the value. And we can come back and we can change this. If I just want to look at the above average values, we could look at the above average values. And now what's included in the shaded area are just the above average values, as you can see there. As we looked at this, we looked at the above average. We can make changes on what to fill and what not to fill. We can change what the fill color would be. For example, if you wanted to use a lighter color on there, you could use a lighter color, or you can make any change that you want. But reference bands themselves have a limited capability. I'd like a little more detail. I'd like to know more about this data set than just looking at the averages and the minimum and the maximum. And we can do that with distribution bands. A distribution band is essentially a band, but it's supported by some analytics or some calculation. And once again, you don't have to write the calculation. It's already there. It's defaulted in there for you. Now let's take a look at how that might work. We just set up a distribution band, just starting right here with a distribution band. It's going to be set up with the scope is across the pane of the chart, and it's going to set up with maximum 60 to 80% of something. Okay, and I'm going to show you what that means, and then it's going to fill in those bands with gray colors, and the interval is going to change. And let's see exactly what that looks like. This is what we've been looking at. This is where we started with the simple band that we put in for the min and the max. And I'm going to edit that. And now we're going to go over here to the distribution. We're not on this one, but we're on this one. And the distribution starts, the default is going to be 60 to 80% of the minimum value. You can see what we've got here, 60, 80% of the minimum value. And I'm just going to slide this over. I'm going to just say okay so we can see it. There's a minimum value, and this is 60 to 80% of the minimum value, and that doesn't tell us a whole lot of anything. So I'd probably want to change that. We could take 60 to 80% of, and this is where we change it, of the sum of sales, and I took the minimum value. Well, let's take the average value, and now we're looking at 60 to 80% of the average value, or maybe 60 to 80% of the maximum value. And let's just leave it there for a second, and we'll come back to this. So now we're looking at, there's the maximum value, and this is 80% of the maximum value, and this is 60% of the maximum value. And as you already figured out, when we got the computation, we can put the values in there if we don't want to see that the way it was written before. Okay, well, that's added another level of information also. Now, I'd still like to know more about that. And I want to start by looking at different options that we've got for what that calculation could be. Okay, we can take a look at percentages, which we were looking at before, 60 or 80%, or we can look at standard deviations, or they call them quantiles here, but we'll go into exactly what that means. But you can select what that distribution looks like, and you can select the values that you want to see. Let's start with standard deviation. Everybody likes to look at standard deviations. We kind of have a sense of what they are. And this is the range of the standard deviation. I can open that up again. And we can just put in the values that you see there. We can see the value. There's the value from 1 to, from -1 standard deviation to 1 standard deviation. And I look at that and I see, well, okay, these are values that are in plus or minus 1 standard deviation. May not be what you want to see. That's okay. We can change that to look like whatever we would like it to look like. We're going to use standard deviation, and you just key these values in. I started at -0.5 to, and then a comma, 1 to 1.5, and let's put in a 2.0. Okay, and of the sample or of the population. And you can see, doing that, we now see the range, and this is the plus 0.5 standard deviation to 1 full standard deviation to 1.5 standard deviations to 2.0 standard deviations. So you can dial that in and look at what you would like to look at. Well, let's take a look at what the other options are here. We can open this up, and I want to take a look at, they call them quantiles. I've set the quantiles to 5. Here's the first and it comes up quintile. The first quintile, second quintile, third quintile, and the boundary for the fourth quintile. So that's the 5th quintile. You didn't want to look at 5. If you want to look at 3, you could look at 3. Or you could look at quartiles. You could look at 4. Or you could look at, like I had, 5. Okay. Now we got one other option here, and we got percentiles. And some people like to look at percentiles for things. And we're going to look at these. You'll see this opens up, and these are individual lines. Again, we're back to individual lines in this distribution. I took percentile, and the first one I set at 95, and I can set it at any value that I wanted. I set it at 95. Okay. And then I've got another one down here. Now, all I did was create a separate line at 90 and 95 percentile. So now I've got more information about the distribution, and I can put them all, for example, on the same chart. And we can see a great deal more information about this distribution, looking at just straight up standard deviations from like -1 to 1. We could look at various levels of standard deviation. We did a quintile distribution, and then we also looked at some percentiles. Gives you a lot of different options. Now we've got one more distribution I'd like to share with you today that's available on the chart also, and that's a box and whisker plot. I don't know if you've used them before, but the box and whisker plot lets you look at the entire range of a value. And we can also look at the limits of that range, and we can look at what's known as the IQR, the interquartile range within that value. And I'm going to show you how it's done. And with that, we can identify outliers. Okay. I just made this chart, and we looked again, it's year and quarter, and we're going to look at sales, and I've got at the subcategory level. And you can see this chart that I created. This is a box and whisker chart. You create that by using this option right here. Okay. And the whiskers are to extend to 1.5 times, which is kind of a standard in the industry, 1.5 times the interquartile range. And this is the interquartile range right here. Now, I selected this look. You could have a look like that. Or this is more of a classic look, as they call it. I like this. I think it's a little easier to see, and you can color it any way you want. There's a variety of color options. Let's just pick that one, and we can look at the chart that way. Okay, you can see here I have this. I have this filtered by category. Okay, and I've done one other thing here, and if we look at the options here for technology, for furniture, and that chart gets really busy when we start looking at it that way. So let's just look at the office supplies for a second. We can use this chart to identify the outliers. We can come in here and hide all the marks except the outliers. Okay. And now when we look at the chart, we're only seeing values that are statistically identified as outliers. They're beyond the 1.5 quintile range. And if we wanted to know what those values were, for example, well, we could just call them out by the label, so we can see what those particular items are. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with you this morning. I wanted to show you how to use reference lines in all their various forms, because you can provide a lot of additional information without doing a whole lot of custom calculations or doing a lot of formulations. Take advantage of that opportunity. I suggest that all the time to users who write in with questions on the form. And very often I found out they didn't know it was there. Well, now you know it's there, so take advantage of it. Everything that you saw this morning, first, the workbook that we use today is out on my Tableau Public site. You can get there this way, or just go out to Tableau Public and look for me, Jim Dehner. And I have already written this up as a blog, and you can go out to my blog at jimdehner.com, or you can use the QR code here, and you'll find it out on my blog. Thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed being with you this morning.